Could we have someone read a prayer, please? Can I pick on you, Iman?
Yes. Praise be to thee, O Lord my God. Thou seest my tears and lamentations, and hearest my sighing, my cry, and bitter wailing. I am the one, O my Lord, that hath held fast the cord of thy mercy, which has surpassed the entire creation. I am the one that hath clung to the hem of thy loving kindness, O thou in whose hand is the empire of all names. Have mercy upon me and upon all them that are in my company, for the wonders of thy grace, and shield us then, O my God, from the mischief of thine enemies, and assist us to help thy faith and to protect thy cause, and to celebrate thy glory. Thou art verily he who from everlasting hath inhabited the inaccessible heights of his unity, and will continue to remain the same forever and ever. Nothing whatsoever escapeth thy knowledge, nor is there anything that can frustrate thee. No God is there beside thee, the Almighty, the ever faithful, the most exalted, the all glorious, the best beloved. Lauded and glorified art thou, in whose hand is the empire of all things. Baha'u'llah.
Thank you. All right, dear friends. The last time we had a regular session 2 weeks ago, we started the second section of the Kitab Ighan. You will remember that the entire book was revealed over a period of 48 hours, 2 days, 2 nights. And he clearly stopped and started again because the first section has a very clear ending. And then the second section has a preamble in Arabic, like the first section did. So it's very clear that they are separate sections and not just something that Shoghi Effendi, when he did his masterful translation, that he just added himself. So I don't know why Baha'u'llah decided to divide this work really into a 1/3 and then 2/3, because the second section is about twice as long as the first section. But in his wisdom, that's what he did. And you will recall that the second section is very heavy. The first section was basically Baha'u'llah teaching us how to understand scripture, giving us terminology. He's going to continue to do that. But now he is diving deeper into what is a manifestation of God. What are the proofs of the Bab? Why was the Bab rejected? And he's going to talk about extremely weighty subjects. And tonight, there's several sections of what we're going to go through tonight. And as we cover about 20 paragraphs, that is very deep. So please hold your questions and comments until the end, as usual. And if you don't mind, let's get started so we have time to get through this. So he begins, as you remember, the preamble is about the messengers of God. And then he talks about how God is unknowable, and so therefore God created this special group of beings who come to earth, are born like the rest of us as babies, and have a twofold nature, a human nature and a divine nature. And they are the ones who are sent to explain God's will to man. So he's going to get much deeper into that, and especially return to a topic that we talked about in that first talk on the second section, which is sovereignty. Because, if you just looked at the Bab sitting there at Baku in that prison cell, he didn't look like someone exercising sovereignty, right? So what's going on here? So Baha'u'llah is going to now give us further insights into what is meant by sovereignty. And the first thing he's going to point out to us in the section we're going through tonight is that earthly sovereignty is of no worth, nor will it ever be in the eyes of God and his chosen ones. God doesn't really care who is king of the universe in the earthly sense, because that's not true sovereignty. God is still in control. Someone might think that they're in control, a Napoleon Bonaparte or a Alexander the Great or President of the United States. But that earthly sovereignty is of no worth, nor will it ever be in the eyes of God and his chosen ones. So he says that you need to look at all these various verses. Moreover, if ascendancy and dominion be interpreted to mean earthly supremacy and temporal power, how impossible will it be for thee to explain these verses? And these are some of the verses from the Qur'an. And verily our host shall conquer. Fain would they put out God's light with their mouths, but God hath willed to perfect his light, albeit the infidels abhor it. He is the dominant above all things. Well, this isn't how Muhammad appeared in earthly eyes. It's not how the Bab appeared. It's not how Jesus appeared. So these verses either have no meaning or they mean something else. And then he goes on to talk about the Imam Hussein and gets into a little bit of a deep discussion of that, about how Hussein, who was still a fairly young man at the time he was martyred, was unsurpassed as a warrior. He and his family and followers were attacked by the Caliph and his band, who wanted Hussein to renounce any station or standing, even though he was the eldest member of Muhammad's family. And we know that Muhammad said he had left two things for mankind, his book and his family. Hussein refused to renounce that aspect of his ministry. And so he and his family suffered defeat during the course of one morning. He goes on to say, this verse from the Quran, and verily our host shall conquer, if that was literally interpreted, then how do you explain what happened to God's chosen ones, such as Imam Hussein, whose heroism was manifest as the sun, yet he was crushed and subjugated and quaffed at last the cup of martyrdom in Karbala. Now, most of you probably know the story of Imam Hussein, and I won't get into details. A number of Baha'i writers have recounted what happened that morning, but most of his followers were very quickly killed, and the Hussein and his family and followers were out of water to drink. And one of the last people standing, who was still helping him, went to try to get water for the women and children and was killed in the process. So Hussein took up his baby son and went toward his attackers and said, please, at least let me go get water for the women and children. And what did they do? Someone shot an arrow. It hit the baby in the throat and killed the child instantly. Hussein, over the course of the next hour or so, was surrounded, and finally he was beheaded. And then his head was taken on a plate to the leader of those who were opposing him. And the blood from when he was decapitated fell on the dirt. And there must have been followers of Hussein who went and gathered it up, and it became very, very precious. You will probably remember that just as Baha'u'llah had a vision in the Sea of Chal of a maiden, the Bab had a similar incident happen about a year before he declared his mission that was reminiscent of the maiden coming to the Sea of Chal. And this was when he had an encounter with the decapitated head of Imam Hussein. According to the Bab, and I'm going to read this. This is from this book, The Dispensation of the Bab by Boris Handel. The spirit of prayer which animates my soul is the direct consequence of a dream which I had in the year before the declaration of my mission. In my vision, I saw the head of the Imam Hussein, which was hanging upon a tree. Drops of blood dripped profusely from his lacerated throat. With feelings of unsurpassed delight, I approached that tree and, stretching forth my hands, gathered a few drops of that sacred blood and drank them devoutly. When I awoke, I felt that the Spirit of God had permeated and taken possession of my soul. My heart was thrilled with the joy of his divine presence, and the mysteries of his revelation were unfolded before my eyes in all their glory. Baha'u'llah also refers to himself as return of the spirit of Hussein, which doesn't mean Hussein was a manifestation of God, but it means that he was a very important chosen one of God. And so if he was so important, why did God let such a terrible thing happen? This same verse, now he's quoting it yet again. Fain would they put out God's life with their mouths, but God hath willed to perfect his light, albeit the infidels abhor it. If that was literally true, it would never correspond to what happens. For in every age, the light of God hath, to outward seeming, been quenched by the peoples of the earth, and the lamps of God extinguished by them. So how then do we explain the ascendancy of the sovereignty of these lamps? They have a very different meaning: ascendancy, power, and authority. He says, consider those drops of blood of Hussein which besprinkled the earth. What ascendancy and influence hath the dust itself, through the sacredness and potency of that blood, exercised over the bodies and souls of men? So much so that he who sought deliverance from his ills was healed by touching the dust of that holy ground. And whosoever wishing to protect his property, treasured with absolute faith and understanding a little of that holy earth within his house, safeguarded safeguarded all his possessions. So this dirt, where his blood, which is blood saturated, became holy to the Shia Muslims. And he wants us to think about the shameful circumstances of his martyrdom, his loneliness, how to outer seeming none could be found to aid him, none to take up his body and bury it. And yet, behold how numerous in this day are those who from the uttermost corners of the earth don the garb of pilgrimage, seeking the sight of his martyrdom, so that they can say prayers at his shrines. This is a sign of Hussein's ascendancy and the power of God. Now, someone could say, so what was in it for Hussein? He was martyred in the most awful way. He was dead. So all this glory that's come after his death, how did it profit him? But Baha'u'llah says it did profit him because that holy soul is immortal, and he liveth the life of God and abideth within the retreats of celestial glory. All of these chosen ones of God are the shining exemplars of sacrifice. They have offered and will continue to offer up their lives, their substance, their souls, their spirit, their all in the path of the well-beloved. For lovers have no desire but the good pleasure of their beloved, and have no aim except reunion with him. So Hussein is very happy to have gone through that. These luminaries, though they be dwelling upon the dust, yet their true habitation is the seat of glory in the realms above. Bereft of all earthly possessions, yet they soar in the realms of immeasurable riches. They are and whilst sore tried in the grip of the enemy, they are seated on the right hand of power and celestial dominion. So we know, even with their more recent martyrs in Iran, that there are instances that show that, yes, they're going through something terrible, but their reality is something quite different, even at the time that they are suffering torture and death. There are reports, for example, that the one member of the Continental Board of Counselors who was martyred in Iran in the early 1980s, that when he was being led to his martyrdom, as he walked through the Evian prison, his feet did not touch the floor, according to people who watched him pass by. He was already in another realm. He then goes on to talk about the difference, not just between the suffering of his chosen ones and the rest of us, but between earthly poverty and riches versus spiritual poverty and riches. And he's going to use two examples, the first being Jesus, and the second comes from the sixth Imam, Sadiq. And this is interesting because he's telling us the kind of things that Jesus said without quoting the Bible in this paragraph. So listen to this. Just thus, Jesus, son of Mary, while seated one day and speaking in the strain of the Holy Spirit, uttered words such as these. O people, my food is the grass of the field, wherewith I satisfy my hunger. My bed is the dust, my lamp in the night, the light of the moon, and my steed mine own feet. Behold, who on earth is richer than I? By the righteousness of God, thousands of treasures circle round this poverty, and a myriad kingdoms of glory yearn for such abasement. And shouldst thou attain to a drop of the ocean of the inner meaning of these words, thou wouldst surely forsake the world and all that is therein. So he's not saying Jesus said these exact words, but uttered words like this. In the book of Matthew, there is a verse that says, foxes have their lairs, birds have their nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. So this is similar to what Baha'u'llah is saying, but of course, Baha'u'llah knows a whole lot more about what Jesus said than what's in the New Testament. And so we shouldn't be so worried about our physical existence, our material wealth. Now, Sadiq, who Baha'u'llah quotes a lot, he's the sixth Imam. He's more of a mystical preacher than the other Imams, from my brief study of the Imams. The question of poverty came up when one of his companions complained to him one day about his poverty. Whereupon Sadiq, that immortal beauty, made reply, "Verily thou art rich, and hast drunk the draught of wealth." This perplexed his follower, who said, "Where are my riches? I don't even have a single coin." So Sadiq then observed, "Don't you possess our love?" His follower said, "Yea, I do possess it, O scion of the prophet of God." Sadiq asked him, saying, "Would you exchange this love for 1,000 dinars?" And his follower answered, "Nay, I wouldn't exchange it, though the whole world and all therein was to be given to me." So then Sadiq remarked, "How can he who possesses such a treasure be called poor?" By poverty and riches, therefore, is meant independence of all else but God, and poverty the lack of things that are of God. He then returns to talking about Jesus and tells the story of his last hours, that last 24 hours, when he was pressed upon to say who he was. The chief Jewish priest brought him to the Roman governor Pilate. Caiaphas was the leading priest at that time. And they asked him about his claim to be the Messiah. And Jesus, as you know, if you've read the New Testament, just stood there quietly, didn't say anything. Finally, someone rose and said to Jesus, "Did you not claim to be the divine Messiah? Did you not say, 'I am the King of Kings, my word is the word of God, and I am the breaker of the Sabbath day?'" Jesus lifted up his head and said, "Beholdest thou not the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and might?" So if you were to see this peasant from the Galilee standing in front of the Roman governor and the Sanhedrin, you would never consider him to have the power of God and to be sitting on God's right hand while they're torturing him and belittling him. Baha'u'llah goes on to say, "How can I relate all that befell him after he spoke those words? How shall I describe their heinous behavior towards him? They at last heaped on his blessed person such woes that he took his flight unto the fourth heaven." Another example from the life of Jesus, showing Jesus's sovereignty. This is the story of his healing a man who was sick with the palsy, who was bedridden. The man called to him for help, and he said to him, "Arise from your bed, your sins are forgiven you." And then the Jews challenged Jesus and said, "Who can forgive sins but God alone?" And Jesus responded by saying, "Whether it is easier to say to the sick of the palsy, 'Arise and take up thy bed and walk,' or to say, 'Your sins are forgiven you,' that ye may know that the Son of Man hath power on earth to forgive sins." This is true sovereignty. This is the real sovereignty, and such is the power of God's chosen ones. He then brings the discussion back to the Bab and how he received the same kind of ill treatment as Jesus. So he says to the uncle of the Bab, to whom the Ighan is directed, you know about what the Jews and Christians have done to Muhammad. The Muslims have in this day done the same thing to the point of the bayan, that is, the Bab. Behold their folly. They utter the self-same words uttered by the Jews of old and don't know it and know it not. They're not even aware that they're repeating the same terrible behavior that they have looked down upon the Jews for doing for 1,000 years. All right, you will remember when I switched the font to green, that means we're now in Gleanings. So when we get to Gleanings, just to remind you, I don't do as much editing. I figured if Shoghi Effendi wanted the whole paragraph in, who am I to cut and paste? So, when the unseen, the eternal, the divine essence caused the day star of Muhammad to arise above the horizon of knowledge, among the cavils which the Jewish divines raised against him was that after Moses, no prophet should be sent of God. He says, you know this. The hand of God, say the Jews, is chained up. Chained up be their own hands, and for that which they have said they were accursed. Nay, outstretched are both his hands. And that's from the Qur'an, that last sentence. So even though the Muslim commentators have talked about this for a long time, that the Jews made this accusation that it was impossible for Muhammad to bring a new revelation, they did the same thing. He saith, how false is that which the Jews have imagined? How can the hand of him who is the king in truth, who caused the countenance of Moses to be made manifest and conferred upon him the robe of prophethood, how can the hand of such a one be chained and fettered? How can he be conceived as powerless to raise up yet another messenger after Moses? So the same is true for the Bab. Observe how in this day all these people have occupied themselves with such foolish absurdities. For over 1,000 years they've been reciting this same verse from the Qur'an and unwittingly pronouncing their censure against the Jews, utterly unaware that they themselves openly and privily are voicing the sentiments and belief of the Jewish people. So, he says that the Bab's uncle knows that the Muslims say that all revelation is ended. And we know that this is nuts, because God, we don't get to control God. These people, referring to the Muslims of his day, have imagined that the flow of God's all-encompassing grace and plenteous mercies, the cessation of which no mind can contemplate, has been altered. They are oblivious that the globe of power shall within its own mighty stronghold protect the lamp of God. God is too powerful to allow these people to destroy his cause. Now we're going to get into something that's going to take some close observation of the text. Attaining the presence of God. I forgot the second set of quotation marks. Sorry. The utter destitution into which this people, that's the Muslims, have fallen doth surely suffice them. Now this sentence, I'm surprised, is not in Gleanings, because it's extremely important. For the highest and most excelling grace bestowed upon man is the grace of attaining unto the presence of God and of his recognition. which has been promised unto all people. Doesn't matter where in the world you live, God has promised everyone the possibility of attaining unto the presence of God. This is the utmost degree of grace vouchsafed unto man by the all-bountiful, the Ancient of Days. But of this grace and bounty, none of this people hath partaken, that's the Muslims. Neither have they been honored with this most exalted distinction. So what is meant by this? So there are three possibilities. So the first attainment unto the divine presence has already been emphatically talked about in all the Holy Scriptures. And some have contended that it means the revelation of God in the day of resurrection. And they assert that the revelation of God signifies a universal revelation. And Baha'u'llah says a universal revelation already exists in all things. And what does he mean by a universal revelation? That all things are the recipients and revealers of the splendid of that ideal king. Were man to gaze with the eye of divine and spiritual discernment, he will readily recognize that nothing whatsoever can exist without the revelation of the splendor of God, the ideal king. All created things eloquently testify to the revelation of that inner light within them. So some people could just say, well, nature, everything in the universe, the atom, the sun, the planets, that tree, this flower, that dog, all have the inner light of God within them. So that's the revelation attaining to the divine presence, right? Baha'u'llah says, if by attainment unto the presence of God is meant attainment unto the knowledge of such revelation, it is evident that all men have already attained unto the presence of the unchangeable countenance of the peerless King. Why then restrict such revelation to the day of resurrection? If it's enough for us to just exist and partake of everything in the universe, why do we need a day of resurrection? If that's what's meant by attaining into the presence of God, right? You can't just go sit up on a cave overlooking the universe and contemplate it. So, second possibility, and this is the one that some Sufi groups adhere to. They have something called the most holy outpouring, which is essentially God manifesting himself to himself. And he says, attainment unto the divine presence in this sense obviously is possible to no one, inasmuch as this revelation is confined to the innermost essence of which no man can attain. So this idea that we can know God revealing himself to himself, that isn't going to happen, right? Even if you're a Sufi. But he says, were they to say that by divine presence is meant the secondary revelation of God? So we've talked about universal revelation, divine outpourings, now secondary revelation of God. If that's what's meant by holy outpouring, this is admittedly applicable to the world of creation, and that is in the realm of the primal and original manifestation of God. Now, I do not understand that sentence. I'll tell you. What is the realm of the primal and original manifestation of God? This revelation is one that is confined to his prophets and chosen ones. And I know I'm not in anywhere even close to those. None of us are those categories. Maybe some of you are in the chosen ones, but I'm not there. So they have a realm of the primal and original manifestation of God. Such revelation is confined to his prophets and chosen ones, inasmuch as none mightier than they hath come to exist in the world of being. These prophets and chosen ones are the recipients and revealers of all the unchangeable attributes and names of God. Unchangeable attributes and names of God. They are the mirrors that truly and faithfully reflect the light of God. Whatsoever is applicable to them is in reality applicable to God Himself, who is both the visible and invisible. The knowledge of Him, who is the origin of all things, and attainment unto Him are impossible save through knowledge of and attainment unto those luminous beings who proceed from the Sun of Truth. By attaining, therefore, to the presence of these holy luminaries, the presence of God Himself is attained. By recognizing Baha'u'llah, we have attained to the presence of God. That's as good as it's going to get for us at this time in history. You know, this is one of the things that makes it difficult to teach some Christians, because they'll quote the scripture where Jesus says, if you've known me, you've known the Father. No one comes to the Father except through me. We can't get to God except through His messengers. From their knowledge, the knowledge of God is revealed, and from the light of their countenance, the splendor of the face of God is made manifest. Through the manifold attributes of these essences of detachment, who are both the first and the last, the seen and the hidden, it is made evident that He who is the Son of Truth is the first and the last, the seen and the hidden. Now, this is all coming from a very long paragraph 151. Mark that down. That may be one you might want to go back and reconsider. So therefore, let's continue on toward the end of that paragraph. Therefore, whosoever and in whatever dispensation hath recognized and attained unto the presence of these glorious, these resplendent and most excellent luminaries, hath verily attained unto the presence of God Himself. Hath verily attained unto the presence of God Himself, and entered the city of eternal and immortal life. Attainment unto such presence is possible only in the day of resurrection, which is the day of the rise of God Himself through His all-embracing revelation. I do not pretend to fully understand paragraph 151 and suggest this would be, like I said, something to go back and look at in closer detail. Now, you will remember that one of the questions, the four main themes that the questions of the uncle of the Bab covered, one of them was what is meant by the day of resurrection. So now he's going to dive deeper into the day of resurrection. This is the meaning of the day of resurrection, spoken of in all the scriptures and announced unto all people. No day is greater than this day, and no revelation more glorious than this revelation. And having set forth all these weighty and infallible proofs, which no understanding mind can question, and no man of learning overlook, how can man possibly, through the idle contention of the people of doubt and fancy, deprive himself of such a bountiful grace? Have they not heard the well-known tradition? When the Gayam riseth, that day is the day of resurrection. So the Bab is a Gayam, so this is the day of resurrection. Strive, therefore, O my brother, O uncle of the Bab, to grasp the meaning of resurrection and cleanse your eyes from idle sayings so that you will recognize your nephew. No day is mightier than this day, and that no resurrection more awful, that's full of awe, that's what the word awful means here, than this resurrection can ever be conceived. Here's something really exciting. You've probably heard this before. One righteous work performed in this day equaleth all the virtuous acts which for myriads of centuries men have practiced. Think about that, friends. Consider, how can he that faileth in the day of God's revelation to attain unto the grace of the divine presence and to recognize his manifestation be justly called learned, though he may have spent eons in the pursuit of knowledge and acquired all the limited and material learning of men? So if you don't find God's messenger for your day and recognize them, it doesn't matter how many PhDs you have, you aren't a learned person. On the other hand, the most unlettered of all men, if he be honored with this supreme distinction, he verily is accounted as one of those divinely learned men whose knowledge is of God. You know, I remember we were privileged to have Mr. Nachavani from the House of Justice meet with a group of youth in our home while we were serving in Haifa. And one of his comments was he wished that when he was a student, he had been as serious about studying the faith as he was doing his academic studies. Just something to think about. This station is also one of the signs of the day of revelation, in that it has been prophesied that the abased among you he shall exalt, and they that are exalted he shall abase. And we have many, many examples in the faith of both learned people who accepted Baha'u'llah and the Bab, and unlettered people who also, with great devotion, accepted Baha'u'llah and the Bab. Baha'u'llah again alludes to his own station. Say, O people of the earth, behold this flame-like youth that speedeth across the limitless profound of the spirit, heralding unto you the tidings. Lo, the lamp of God is shining, and summoning you to heed his cause, which, though hidden beneath the veils of ancient splendor, shineth in the land of Iraq above the dayspring of eternal holiness. Of course, Baha'u'llah is writing this from Baghdad. And then where we're going to end this evening, this very important paragraph. O my friend, were the bird of thy mind to explore the heavens of the revelation of the Qur'an, were it to contemplate the realm of divine knowledge unfolded therein, thou wouldst assuredly find unnumbered doors of knowledge set open before thee. Thou wouldst certainly recognize that all these things which have in this day hindered this people from attaining the shores of the ocean of eternal grace, the same things in the Mohammedan dispensation prevented the people of that age from recognizing that divine luminary and from testifying to his truth. So I want to take a moment here to talk about the importance of us as Baha'is studying the Quran. Amatul Baha Rahia Khanum said that when she first married Shoghi Effendi and of course moved into the master's house, he asked her if she had read the Quran, and she admitted that no, I'm sorry, dear, I have not read the Quran. And he said, well, that's your first order of business. You must read the Quran. There's another story that when Abdul Baha got to the prison in Akka, he's a young man in his early 20s, and he noticed that one of the things he had to contend with in life was because of who he was. People felt that they had to be on their best behavior whenever they were around him. And now 60 some people were going to be living together in very close quarters. And he did not want them, these companions there in the prison, to feel that way all the time because he was in their midst. So he asked the prison officials if he could be given another place other than the main area of the tower there at the Citadel, if he could be given a place to sleep away from everyone else. So what did they do? They gave him the basement, which was below sea level. So it was always damp and always an uncomfortable place to be. But he stayed there by himself in that damp basement for those 2 years and 4 months and some days. And he said he was very happy that he was there, despite the terrible atmosphere. And it's why, by the way, he developed rheumatism from those 2 years sleeping in that basement. But he said he had always wanted to study the Quran, and there by himself in that basement, he had the environment where he could do that without being disturbed by other people. So he felt it was important to take the time and create a space to study the Quran. Most of us don't speak Arabic, so we have to go with translations. And there have been an explosion of new translations into English of the Quran. I don't know which one is good because I can't compare it with the original text. There are Baha'is who have strong opinions about that, and please go to people who are experts on it. But I would urge you, if you don't own a copy of the Quran, get one, get multiple translations so you can compare the translations. And one of the things that it's apparent to me as we go through the Ighan is that the guardian is doing his own translations of some of the verses. Even though he used Rodwell and Sales English translations, it's clear that he makes his own translation of some of the verses as he's translating the Ighan. So I would urge you to do that. All right, so this is as far as we're going to go tonight, and I want to allow some time for people to comment and have questions. We're going to start on 158 next week and go all the way through paragraph up till 191, through, I guess, through paragraph 190. So any thoughts? Let me stop sharing so I can see more of you. Any thoughts or questions?
Yes. One quick question. What does it mean by fourth heaven?
Yes. I only know this from looking up things like that in Wikipedia. Apparently in Islamic commentary, the heaven is divided into 7 spheres, and the manifestations of God apparently go to the 4th heaven. And I find it very interesting. First of all, that Baha'u'llah says that. I mean, you can go online and see some of the commentary on these various heavens. But you'll notice that with Nabab, Asiya Khanum, he says that she will be with him in all the worlds of God, which means that she's with him where manifestations of God are in areas and stages of heaven that the next world that the rest of us probably will not have access to, which makes you wonder who she really is. You know, Abdu'l-Baha says she was created by God for Baha'u'llah. Very interesting question. I'm glad you picked that up. Yeah.